Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. I'm so glad that you've joined me today. Remember, I've got a new book out that is called Look Up. If you haven't ordered that yet, you can get that on exomarriage.com or you can get it on amazon.com. I believe it will bless you. We're also going to Israel next year, at the end of this year, November and December. That information is there on your screen. We would love to have you join us on that trip. It's going to be a blessing. Now, I have joining me again today, best-selling author, end times expert Bill Salus. He was with me last week, and we were talking about this Iran prophecy, this Elam prophecy, and we're going to be talking about it again today. He is the founder of Prophecy Depot Ministries. He's written 11 books, produced 14 DVDs. He's an author and speaker that I've learned an awful lot from over the years. He's a researcher, very good teacher. I'm glad to have him joining me today to discuss a very important prophetic event, which is also a book that Bill has written called Nuclear Showdown in Iran. Bill, thank you for joining me again today.
Jimmy, what a time to be alive. Right?
I know it, my gosh. It's exciting. You know, it's prophecy is John Walvoord, Dr. John Walvoord, who was at the Dallas Theological Seminary. He was considered, I think, the scholar, the prince of scholars in the end times. He located 1,000 prophecies in the Bible. He actually wrote a book called Every Prophecy in the Bible that people can get. 1,000 prophecies in the Bible, and 500 have been literally fulfilled. And the other 500, of course, he said they will be literally fulfilled.
Right.
So Bible prophecy is all over the place, and it's empirical, it's measurable, and I don't think there's ever been an event in my lifetime other than the reestablishing of Israel, which was 1948. I was born in 1953. But except for the establishment of Israel, what's happening in Iran right now is just really an in-your-face fulfillment of Bible prophecy. There's going to be, of course, you wrote this book about Jeremiah 49. What do you think right now? Because we're going to talk about, last week we talked a lot about Jeremiah 49 and kind of the history of what's happened between Israel and Iran. What do you think right now is the most significant thing that's happening related to Israel and Iran?
Absolutely. And I would also like to, before we start on the laying that whole thing out, maybe give them a quick recap. I can do it real quick about our show last week in case they didn't.
Absolutely.
See it. Jeremiah 49 verses 34 through 39 speaks of 6 verses speaks about a disaster that happens, probably nuclear, in Iran, mainly around the western side of Iran, by the Persian Gulf over there. What happens is a time comes where the Lord gets fiercely angry with Iran. He brings about a disaster. The reason he's angry is because there's bad leadership, because he says he will destroy from there the kings and the princes, and he'll bring about a disaster. And the way the disaster happens is he's going to break the bow. He's going to stop the missile launching capabilities that Iran currently possesses at the foremost of their might, meaning probably their nuclear program, so that they won't be able to launch something lethal somewhere, probably Israel is our concern.
Right.
He's going to prevent that from happening at a time when Iran has a menu of enemies, and they do today with Israel, the international community, America, the Gulf states of the Arab states over there, Saudi Arabia, etc. And that's sort of a nutshell. The prophecy, the good news is the exiles who get dispersed as a result of that disaster will someday be restored their fortunes back into Iran. That is a lot of Iranian Christians who've converted from Islam, very excited. But that's sort of the nutshell version of the prophecy. So now we can talk about, well, how do we get from here to there in this program?
Yeah, and so you've written a book, The Nuclear Showdown in Iran, which is talking about the Elam, the prophecy, Jeremiah 49, concerning Elam. You've also written a book about the Psalm 83 war, which also is a part of this scenario. I mean, it's a part of the end time scenario. And then, of course, Ezekiel 38 and 39 talks about the coalition of nations, Russia, Persia, which is Iran, Turkey, all this coalition of nations. So there's going to be a succession of these wars. Now, do you believe that the war, this Elam prophecy, which is really the destruction of Elam, do you believe that precedes Psalm 83?
I do.
Tell me why.
My radar right now is a sequence of prophetic events. Like you said, Israel 1948 was the last literal fulfillment of a prophecy. They're celebrating their 75th anniversary this May.
Amazing.
And I think the next prophecy is going to happen probably even this year, maybe this Iran prophecy. And it won't be another 75 years until the subsequent one. I believe at that point, like birth pangs, they're going to be becoming more intense and become more frequently, and you can't stop them. And Jesus used the analogy in Matthew 24, verse 8, end times would be like birth pangs, right? These types of events.
Right.
So what I'm looking at right here, because what we see going on with Iran's nuclear program, we went through a whole history of the last 10, 13 years of Israel's concerns about Iran's nuclear program. I believe they've got to no longer act covertly, but going to act overtly against Iran, and they're going to attack Iran's nuclear program. They've been training for it. They've got money for it, and they're prepared to do that. But they also know when they do that, they will create probably a proxy war around them with Hezbollah to the north, who has 150,000 missiles, some of them precision guided, pointed at Israel that they could fire about 3,000 missiles a day. You also have Syria, right? Iran's proxy Syria with Bashar al-Assad, who used chemical weapons over 300 times in their Syrian revolution.
Wow.
A serious threat to Israel. You have the Hamas down by the Gaza area there, Iranian proxy, who says they can send 1,000 missiles a day into Israel to match what Hezbollah is doing from the north. So Israel is surrounded. You have the Houthis way down beyond Saudi Arabia, down in Yemen. They say we also now have precision-guided missiles from Iran that could hit Tel Aviv. You have Shiite militias in Iraq and more. So I'm saying at this point Israel has to act. They've got to probably preemptively act, maybe even unilaterally.
Well, their options are all terrible. If they don't do anything, Iran is going to strike them with a nuclear weapon. They've said they will. They've been trying to get nuclear capacity, which they either are there, they're very close to being there. Now, on the last program, Bill, you were talking about how they have attacked Iran's nuclear facilities over and over, killed their nuclear scientists, all those things like that. And so Israel knows what's happening in Iran. Do you believe that? I mean, in their nuclear program.
I absolutely do. Matter of fact, the Mossad had confiscated 100,000 documents of Iran's nuclear program back in, they released information on that in April of 2018. So they can get in there and they can get the information they want. So I think they're pretty well aware of the status and progress of Iran's nuclear program.
So I'm saying that to say they know when to strike. They know how close Iran is to getting the nuclear warheads, so they know when to strike. It seems as though that because of the rhetoric of Israel and Iran, that's getting pretty close. They're getting pretty close. So if Israel doesn't strike, one nuclear strike from Iran to Israel is pretty much game, set, match if they hit the right place. So Israel, they can't do that. So their other choice is to bomb Iran, which immediately starts all the proxies going on.
Right.
Now, do you believe that's the Psalm 83 war?
I believe, here's how I would lay this out, Jimmy, if I can. I've got it down to a few-minute version. Right? I've been done enough of these shows, right? Israel and Iran go toe-to-toe. Israel probably preempts the strike. Iran then calls upon its proxies, who we just enumerated upon.
Right.
It's got Israel surrounded.
Right.
Now, Iran is not in the Psalm 83 war, which we can talk about who is in just a moment. But Syria, under the banner of Assyria, Hezbollah under the banner of the inhabitants of Tyre in Psalm 83, Hamas down in the Gaza, the Philistines, as part of Psalm 83. They're all involved in Psalm 83. They're going to, I believe they would then come with Iran against Israel. And I think Israel comes under a prison rules fight. I mean, they're in trouble now because their Iron Dome and their defense missile systems cannot stop the barrage that's going to come against them. And I believe then you would see Israel has to act out with a nuclear weapon and take out a major city to make a statement. And I believe that city they would destroy would be the most opportune city to destroy. Right close to them is Damascus. Right. I believe they would reduce Damascus to rubble in fulfillment of Isaiah 17, verse 1. Right. It says, Damascus will cease from being a city, it will be a ruinous heap. We find out in Isaiah 17:9 that that desolation is caused by the children of Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces, who exist in fulfillment of Bible prophecy, which I can get into if time permits. It also says in Isaiah 17, verse 14, that one night you see him in Damascus in the masculine pronoun, in the morning he is no more. This is the portion of those who rob us and those who plunder us, meaning in self-defense, overnight, against the barrage that's happening against them, Israel takes out a major Arab city. When they take out Damascus, the Arab world is going to flip out, because that's an Arab city, and it's the oldest continuously inhabited city in recorded history, dates back to the time of Abraham.
Yeah.
And they're going to be concerned, what about Beirut? What about Amman, Jordan? And Amman, Jordan goes next. I can point that out in a minute. What about Cairo? What about Mecca, right? They're going to be concerned. What's to stop Israel from using a nuclear weapon? That was probably a nuclear weapon they used on Damascus, strategically launched at a certain height, from taking out our cities. And by the way, in Isaiah 17, verses 4 through 6, which I didn't quote, talks about at the time of this battle with Syria, it says that the glory of Jacob will wane lean, his glory will fade, his flesh will wax lean. It'll be like a shaking of an olive tree with two or three olives left in the uppermost branch and 4 or 5 in the fruitful boughs. And when you use the imagery, what Isaiah seems to be saying is that you superimpose an olive tree over a map of Israel, and an olive tree can have 500,000 olives on it, on a modern, and they're very common trees in the Middle East and in Israel. Yeah. And you got a shaking, and there's only a few left in the uppermost branch, and a few more down in the fruitful boughs. So it looks like Israel takes a hit with all the weapons and stuff coming against them. Their glory fades, their flesh waxes lean. Not a good image for Israel.
Right.
And I think the Arab world then goes, well, wow, they could take out our city. Let's come together now and make a final shot at them, which they did. They tried to take them out in 1948, 1967, 1973. But now's our opportunity. If we don't do it now, they might take out our cities. And I believe that's when you get into Psalm 83. And the next city that then goes is Amman, Jordan. We find out that's the capital of Jordan. We find out in Jeremiah 49, verse 2, it says, there's an alarm of war in Rabbah of the Ammonites, that's Amman, Jordan. It shall be a desolate mound, and Israel will take possession of its inheritance.
Wow.
Meaning Israel's taken them out, just like they took out Damascus. They're not too far away from each other.
No.
From where you're at, probably to the border of Oklahoma, for you viewers who understand the maps. Jimmy's in Texas area.
Yeah.
So they take out that city as part of because Amman, Jordan, Ammon, Moab, and Edom, by their ancient names, is modern-day Jordan. They're all in part of Psalm 83 also. Yeah. And then we get in, there's other prophecies I can get into too, Jimmy, but I see that being the fulfillment of Psalm 83. And when Psalm 83 happens, after Jeremiah 49, after Isaiah 17, Psalm 83, now you have Israel in a different position. They're mighty. They've got an exceedingly great army in fulfillment of Ezekiel 37:10, which said they would have an exceedingly great army. They can expand territorially. They'll take over their possession. We said Amman, Jordan. They'll take over Jordan. They'll take over 5 cities in Egypt. Will speak the language of Canaan. That's Hebrew. Isaiah 19:18. They're going to start to, when they win wars, they expand territorially. Joshua did it 3,300 years ago. King David did it 3,000 years ago. The IDF did it. Israel did it in 1967 in the Six-Day War. Yeah. It increases the defensibility of their borders. They believe that's their land because it's part of the Abrahamic covenant, land given to him in Genesis 15:18 from the river of Egypt, probably the Nile, to the river Euphrates, which courses through modern-day Iraq and Syria. Someday they're going to get all that land. I believe they're going to get some of it incrementally after the Psalm 83. When Jesus returns, he'll give them all that land in the Messianic kingdom. But I think at that point, Israel can become, securely. They can take down the walls, the border walls they have with Lebanon, the fences around Gaza, the border wall they have with Egypt, the partition wall they have going through the middle part of Israel, 400-mile-long wall, separates Palestinian terror from Israel proper. They can tear those walls down, live in unwalled villages, dwell safely, have plunder and booty, be greater, safer Israel. And I believe that's the Israel that Ezekiel 38 comes after Gog and Magog invasion, dwelling securely without walls, bars, nor gates in the latter years, brought back from the nations, living in the land of Israel, a peaceful people. They're not that right now. No. But they will be that after this scenario of events happens. And I'm not saying this is how it's going to happen, but I scripturally support this in this book, in my Psalm 83 book, and that sort of thing.
It makes a lot of sense. And I did a teaching and used some maps related to Elam. Elam is where Israel will strike. It is the nuclear rich, like we were talking about on the last show. It's where their hypersonic missiles are. It's where their missile batteries are. It's where the Bushehr nuclear plant is. And so when Israel strikes Elam, it destroys it. I mean, it's an utter destruction. Mm-hmm. According to Jeremiah 49, you have the dispersion that takes place, and then you have the proxies. that go to war, just like you talked about. To me, it makes perfect sense because the Jeremiah 49 has not happened. Okay, and then Psalm 83 hasn't happened. Now let's go back because I asked you this on a previous show. I want to ask it again. Why wasn't the War of Independence in 1949 and 50? Why wasn't that the fulfillment of Psalm 83? Because it seems like they're all regional.
Right, and those very countries, and some people actually do believe it was fulfilled at that time. I don't, for the reasons I'm about to share with you. Those very countries listed in Psalm 83 by their ancient names actually did come together against Israel. A few more were included. Some people were helping, like Pakistan and things like that. So that kind of rules it out. But the thing that really rules it out was that, the Psalm 83 is 18 verses. You could say, well, maybe partially it was fulfilled verses 1 through 8, which talked about the Confederacy coming together of the nations of the 1948 war to destroy Israel, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. Right. But Asaph, who wrote the Psalm 3,000 years ago, who was a prophet, we find out in 2 Chronicles 29:30, he goes on and tells God, he petitions God to deal with them like you did with the Midianites at that time of Gideon, deal with them like you did the Canaanites back at the time of Deborah in the book of Judges. So he draws our attention to Judges chapters 4 through 8. And those were battles where the Lord empowered the Israeli Defense Forces, Gideon and his 300-man army, got involved and took out 120,000 Midianites with the help of Ephraim. Then you had the Canaanites. Now, the Midianites had oppressed the Jews for 7 years, but they never oppressed the Jews again after Gideon's war. So the Israeli Defense Forces were empowered at that time. Then the Canaanites had oppressed the Jews for 20 years, but after Deborah, the prophetess's war with Barak, the general of Israel, they defeated everyone, the infantry, the leaders in both wars, the Midianites and the Canaanites. And neither of those Canaanites never oppressed Israel, the Jews again. These Arabs are oppressing the Jews presently. Yeah. And Asaph goes on to say, make them like a whirling dust, a tempest before the storm, chaff before the wind, confounded and ashamed, cause them to perish, that they may know you are the one true God. That hasn't happened yet, Jimmy. Yeah. So in my estimation, it's a process. Yes, we see that's what they want, that's their intention, but it wasn't fulfilled, in my estimation, entirely in 1948.
So the Psalm 83 war, and that's a great explanation. It ends the conflict with that group of people, and that group of people, they're still antagonizing Israel right now.
It's the conclusion of the conflict.
So let's go from there to Ezekiel 38 and 39. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say where we are right now?
No, that's good. I think we laid out the strategy that's on my radar. Again, it's a caveat because there's some speculation in there, but I do scripturally support these things.
But you could, Bill, all of this could happen in 2 or 3 months. You could have a strike on Elam. You could have the proxy war. You could have the Psalm 83 war. It could happen very quickly. Don't you think that's right?
Right. And if Israel and Iran go toe-to-toe, the first thing Iran's going to do is call their proxies. The second thing they're going to do is they're going to shut down the Persian Gulf. Yeah. And that's going to be a problem for world economies because over a quarter of the world's oil comes through that Persian Gulf still.
Yeah. So Russia's a big deal. They're, and I believe this is true, but in the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war, it's all Muslim except for Russia. Right. Now the Soviet Union was half Muslim, the Stan states. And of course now they're not, but so you have Russia is really the power boss. Gog is the leader of this coalition of Persia, which is Iran, Turkey. You have some of the northern African states. Syria included in that by the Assyrians? Is it?
No, they're in Psalm 83.
Psalm 83.
You don't have Assyria in Ezekiel 38.
And of course, Damascus has already been destroyed at that point.
I would suggest
you believe it. So you have this coalition of nations. Talk about the provocation, because when it says the hook in the jaw, what do you believe the hook is?
Well, their main goals are coming for plunder and booty and great spoil. So those economies that Russia puts together, their populations, including Iran and Turkey, and we listed some of them in the other show, they're hurting and they need a boost in their economies, and they see that Israel has got that boost economically. They got great plunder, great spoil, and great booty. We already see that Israel is burgeoning as an economy. I think they recently surpassed the economy of the UK, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
They have natural gas they're developing. Now they're starting to export it. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russia shut the spigot off the natural gas going into Europe. Europe was getting about 58% of their national gas from Russia. Now they're asking Israel to start exporting natural gas into Europe. So, I think the hooks in the jaw is going to have something to do economically. You got inside there of the Ezekiel prophecy, in Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 13, you have these sideline protesters. Among them are Sheba, Dedan. Sheba would be Yemen, Dedan, Saudi Arabia. The merchants of Tarshish, not the athletes, the entertainers, the musicians, the politicians. The merchants. These are, I believe Tarshish is probably the UK, and the young lions, I believe, could be America. I get into that in my Now Prophecies book.
Right.
But I believe the merchants are saying on the sidelines, they're going, Russia's coming after things we have commercial interest with in Israel. That's why we get the key merchants. So I think the hooks in the jaws got something economically. Maybe it's Israel's natural gas and the things that spoils the war they've gotten, and Russia's saying, coming after them. But they have to bring a big coalition, more than just Ukraine.
Do you believe that Tarshish is Spain or Britain? It says Tarshish in their young lions. Do you think that's a reference to the United States, or what do you think about that?
Well, I have a study I do in the Now Prophecies book where I do the biblical, geographical, archaeological, geopolitical reasons why it's not Spain, but why it's the UK, the merchants of Tarshish. And the young lions, I point out how the colonies out of the UK, of course, included Australia, Canada, right, others, but also included America. So I do that's my Now Prophecies book. It's a whole study. I wish we had time to go through it. But I see that as being not Spain for various reasons I put forward, but probably the UK and probably America. And I think that might be where you find American Bible prophecy, yeah, which as a protester on the sidelines is very disturbing, because why aren't we fighting with Israel? Are we still a superpower? Why are we barking from the sidelines? You could see why the UK is just a protester, because once upon a time, the British Empire, the sun never used to set on the British Empire. They had control over 458 million people, mm-hmm, about a quarter of the world's population, and 13 million square miles, about a fifth of the world's landmass. Now they've got control over about 94 million people, or 64 million and 94,000 square miles. I might have those backwards. Yeah. But the sun is set on the British Empire. Right. And you can see why they would only protest. They couldn't stop, right, the massive invasion of Russia's troops, which has about 2.5 million troops. If they took all those armies today, 2.5 million troops coming against Israel, who today has about 176,000 troops available. So it's a different scenario than the Israel we see right now today.
Well, so the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war, do you believe that this happens prior to the tribulation or in the tribulation?
I put this before the tribulation for a couple reasons, but one of the main reasons that I and Dr. Ron Rhodes and Dr. Ronald Fruchtenbaum and others put it before is because one of the keys we have on timing is that after the war and the aftermath, they're converting the weapons that were coming against them from Russia and the hordes into fuel, right, burning the weapons for 7 years. Now, when you understand the timeline with Israel and the tribulation, the first half of the tribulation, they're living in a pseudo-peace. It's a pseudo-peace because the Antichrist is going to break at the midpoint of the tribulation, right, by doing the abomination of desolation in their temple. The second half of the tribulation, even Jesus instructs them in Matthew 24, verse 15, flee. When you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel, flee immediately, because he realizes, according to Zechariah 13:8, that 2/3 of the Jews will be killed as per the Antichrist campaign of genocide at the midpoint of the tribulation. So they're fleeing for their lives. If they're not burning weapons. If anything, they're picking up a weapon to defend themselves as they flee. However, if you back the clock out, first 3.5 years you could burn weapons in the tribulation, and 3.5 years before the tribulation you could burn weapons, no problem. But you're not likely going to be burning weapons in the second half of the tribulation. And we're talking about the people in the towns and cities of Israel are burning the weapons, converting the fuel. Some people will go, well, maybe it's the Antichrist and his armies are doing it. No, it talks about specifically the Israelis are doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So timeline again. So Joel chapter 3, God in the first person, he says, in those days and at that same time, when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, I'm going to enter into judgment with the nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat on account of my people, my heritage Israel, whom they've scattered among the nations. They've also divided up my land. And so God is saying, in the same period of time when I bring back the captives of Judah and Jerusalem, 1948, I'm going to enter into judgment with the nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat, and that's the valley between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount. And so Armageddon, in other words. So then Jesus in Matthew 24, the generation that sees these things will see all things take place. So we are now almost at the 75th anniversary of Israel being a nation, being reborn. Psalm 90 says the days of a man's life are 70 years. We don't like that scripture right there. But the days of a man's life are 70 years, or if by reason of strength, they're 80 years. So do you believe, we do believe, I think the Elam War is impending. This is imminent, okay? And so what do you believe about a generation seeing everything? Do you think that that's another 30 or 40 years? You think, because with your scenario here of having the war in Elam, the destruction of Elam, the Psalm 83 war, and then later on, after Israel has expanded and gained the territories there, then later on there's going to be the Ezekiel 38, 39 wars, which makes perfect sense. What do you think about that? What do you think about timeline? You think that we're looking at the tribulation beginning in our lifetime or another 10 or 20 years? What do you think?
Well, let me start by giving you my interpretation of the fig tree generation.
Okay.
He did say when you see the fig tree, which most of us would say that was the rebirth of Israel in 1948. But he goes on to say, when you see all these things, that generation shall not pass.
Right.
I think the key word is there, all these things. What are all the things he's talking about? Well, you got to go back, Matthew 24, verse 8, the beginning of sorrows period, nation coming against nation, which probably World Wars I, World Wars II, etc. Then he goes to Matthew 24, verse 9, then they'll bring you up into tribulation. So I think that's when the tribulation starts, after the beginning of sorrows. We haven't ended the beginning of sorrows just yet. Then he goes, Matthew 24, 15, then you'll see the abomination of desolation, which means the temple's been built by then.
Right.
The Antichrist has come on the scene. Now you're in the mid part of the tribulation, beginning of sorrows, tribulation, mid part of tribulation. Then he goes, then they'll go into great tribulation, which is the second half of the tribulation. Then he says, the generation who sees all those things will not pass. So in my estimation, what he's saying is it's not generationally 70 years, 40 years, or 100 years. He's saying basically when you see all these things in the history books, that last generation, that tribulation generation will not pass. So that's how I would look at that. Because the problem with the 70-year thing, which was a common one, well, that's already happened. The rapture would have already had to happen.
Almost had 80 years.
Then they started sliding. Well, it's got to be 70 years from 1967. So all of a sudden you got a moving sliding scale. Yeah. And some will say it's going to be a 100-year generation. In my estimation, all that is just leading to our date setting of pre-trib rapture, which I don't date set a pre-trib rapture. It's imminent. It could happen at any given time.
So you believe that the beginning of the tribulation could be a ways?
I believe the rapture could happen at any given time. And then the rapture doesn't start the tribulation. It's a confirmation of a false covenant with the Antichrist in Daniel 9:27.
And do you believe there's going to be a delay between the beginning of, or the rapture and the beginning of the tribulation?
Yeah, I believe in a post-rapture, because it happens after the rapture, pre-tribulation gap. I've written a thesis on it, 60-some pages. I dare to go into it and talk about what could happen in that gap. Most of our colleagues would say there is a gap. Some think it's a few days, some think it could be a few years. I subscribe it could be a couple years maybe.
Yeah.
But certain things have to happen that puts Israel in a position where they feel the need to confirm a covenant. And we find in Isaiah 28, verses 15 through 18, who the other party is, death and Sheol, what the motivation is. They want to avoid an overflowing scourge that's being perpetrated by death and Sheol throughout the world. In my next prophecies book, I put a face on the overflowing scourge and who death and Sheol are. And I dare to go into the gap and suggest what's going on possibly at that time. But I do believe there's a gap. But then you have a tribulation. So if the rapture happened today, a couple-year gap, guessing, I know the period of gap, the tribulation would be not too far away, maybe a few years down the road. 7 years. Then the second coming, 7 years of tribulation. Then the second coming, there's a 75-day interval where Jesus mops up the mess from the tribulation. There's still people running around with the mark of the beast, the abomination of desolation still sitting in the temple.
Right.
He's got to restore the earth that's been destroyed. Then you have a 1,000-year millennial kingdom. So I think in the millennial kingdom, our future is very bright, Jimmy.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the fifth book of my Now Prophecy series, the Millennium Prophecies. I believe the millennial kingdom could be coming probably within, I can't set a date because I don't know when the rapture is, because the rapture is the trump card. But 10 years, 15, 20 years, whatever, So Maybe longer, I don't know.
Well, this is just a phenomenal conversation. Bill has nuclear showdown in Iran. This is talking about the Jeremiah 49 prophecy concerning Elam. We talked about it a lot in the last program, and of course in this program, this is kind of where we began. Also, the Psalm 83 war is another book that you've written, which goes into detail about that war. And I think that you've laid the case out very well, that this happens first. It could happen tomorrow. That this happens first, and then you're going to have the regional response, and then the Psalm 83 war. Now, this is a series of books. This is the Now Prophecies, Disaster in Iran, Destruction of Damascus, Decline of America, the Final Arab-Israeli War. Now, you've got a series of these.
I have a 5-book series that takes the reader from here to eternity. What happens now, no more preconditions, these kind of prophecies, some we talked about in your 2 shows, on through to the gap, on through to the first half of the tribulation, on through to the second half of the tribulation, on into the millennium and the eternal order, from here to eternity. We also have it on a thumb drive, a flash drive, all the books and DVDs with the Bible, because after the rapture, we're very concerned for those left behind.
Right.
There'll be censored media, the fake news, etc. They'll be shutting down online Bibles, online commentaries. So we have a flash drive that they can download to their phone, they can carry with them, called the Spiritual Survival Kit flash drive for those left behind.
ProphecyDepot.com is Bill's website. I encourage you to go on there. He has DVDs, a lot of books, very, very well thought out, well researched books. Bill, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Jimmy.
And I want you to come back and be with us again.
I'd love to.
You bend my brain. You help me kind of get things straightened out in my head. And so thank you guys for joining us today. We hope that this program has been a blessing to you. See you next time right here on the Tipping Point Show.